Hello and welcome to Alien Encounters of the Strange Kind, Part 3. Or should I say, at least I think this is Part 3. When most of us hear the term aliens in relation to the paranormal, we normally conjure up images of the typical gray-skinned being with a bulbous head and enormous black eyes. While this is frequently the case for most sightings involving extraterrestrials, there are other stories about very different looking beings. With this small series, we have been looking into those encounters and trying to give them the attention that they deserve. I will be providing the links to Part 1 and 2 in the description in case you missed those videos. Now, I know, having realized it late last Monday night, that I said I was going to include a link to a previous video on that uploads topic, and I forgot to do so. This time, I have the links right here, and I promise they will be in the description. If I forget to do it this time, then I guess there's no hope for me. So join me as we look to the skies, dark forests, and possibly even your backyard for some really odd looking aliens. The first story that I would like to discuss with you was said to have happened in the province of Apoko near the town of Potosi in Bolivia. As such, this entity is known as the Patoshi Sheepslayer. On March 27, 1967, a 27-year-old Quechua Indian woman named Valentina Flores would encounter something that would haunt her to this day and may lend credence to another phenomenon that is frequently tied to extraterrestrials. On this day, Valentina was out tending to the animals on her farm, and she had her infant child, Theodosa, with her. Her husband, Gumercindo, was working elsewhere at the time. With her child strapped to her back, she went to work herding her 64 sheep to a spot to graze near a stone structure she called a corral. It was then that she noticed that her herd of llama had wandered off. Feeling comfortable that the sheep would be fine, she headed out to try to track down her lost animals. After finding them 45 minutes away from her property, she started to bring them back home just as the sun was beginning to set for the day. When she managed to return home, she now found that her sheep were missing since they were no longer in the field. I am sure at this point she was getting a bit frustrated, but she decided to check if they had wandered into the corral. It was in this moment she noticed something incredibly odd, since over the structure there was a web-like cloth draped over the building, and it appeared to be attached to the ground. As she drew nearer, she noticed, in horror, that the bodies of 63 of her sheep laid motionless on the ground, and there was an odd-looking being standing under the cloth with her final sheep between its legs. The being was holding a strange tube-like device that ended in a hook and appeared to be connected to the being via a chain. Valentina described it as being 3 to 4 feet tall, was chubby, and had an odd one-piece suit on it that resembled a diver's, but it had brown boots. She also stated that it wore a mechanical pack on its back that was supported by 2 red straps that crossed in front of the body. It also had 2 utility satchels on its side, and it wore a blocky helmet that appeared to have a propeller on the top of it. The face was exposed and it looked human-like, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a very bushy red mustache, but the skin was extremely white-colored. This person was attempting to kill her sheep, and had already had a bucket full of entrails from her other animals. Angered by this carnage, Valentina started swearing at the being and pelting it with rocks. The person looked up with shock, ran over to a box that resembled a radio, turned a crank on it, and immediately the web cloth began to disappear into the box. It was at this point that Valentina noticed there was a second person dressed in the same fashion farther out in the field. Startled from the commotion, this being hopped over a stone fence and ran out into the field, where she witnessed it climb into a chair-like device, which sprouted a propeller and took off into the sky, leaving its partner behind. Not happy with what was going on, Miss Flores grabbed her wooden cudgel and headed straight towards the remaining being. Apparently it began to frantically try to talk to her, but she couldn't understand anything it said. She raised her weapon and struck the being in the face, and it immediately began to bleed profusely. The creature then grabbed its hook-like tool and threw it at Valentina, of which it cut her arm and her chest. She claims that the knot holding her child on her back kept the tool from plunging deeply into her chest. The tool immediately retracted back to the thrower by the chain it was connected to, and in this brief lull, Miss Flores managed to strike as hard as she could on the being's right forearm. Apparently, this blow broke its arm as it just dangled there, and it decided enough was enough. It quickly grabbed the radio-looking device, ran off into the field, and escaped in a similar-looking mechanism as its partner. The Bolivian army was called, and they collected the sheep carcasses and even gathered samples of the blood that had been spilled from the injured invader. In the labs, it was found that all the bodies of the sheep were missing their blood, eyes, ears, parts of their mouth, some belly fat, and portions of their internal organs. I was not able to find any results behind what the blood belonged to. While some may think that this is just the product of a wild imagination, it does need mentioned that apparently the Flores family never had any interest in UFOs or aliens, and set up their home far away from others. In 2001, Valentina was interviewed again, and it is said that she made it clear that she really didn't know what a UFO or alien was, and wasn't interested in the topic at all after it was explained to her. In light of this information, it is obvious that she just viewed these beings as someone attacking her farm, and that she needed to defend it. Regardless of what exactly happened that day, her sheep were strangely killed, and blood was found. I just have to give kudos to the woman who encountered an alien, and rather than running away in fear, she beat the living daylights out of it. We are now moving to an encounter that occurred in Kofu, Japan. This being is known simply as the Kofu Fang humanoid. On February 23, 1975, two 7-year-old boys named Katsuhiro Yamahata and Masato Kawano were roller skating near the Hinode housing estate in Kamimachi around 7 p.m. This enjoyment was interrupted when the boys noticed two orange, as they described, glittering UFOs flying over their heads. As the boys watched intently, one of the craft turned and flew towards Mount Otago, whereas the second craft started to land in a nearby vineyard, all the while making a cracking or ticking sound similar to a Geiger counter. The two immediately ran to the landing site to check out what was going on. They found that the object was no longer orange in color, but was silver, and it had more of a saucer shape with a dome on top. The craft was resting on 3 rounded objects that were underneath it, and there appeared to be strange writing on the outside of the ship. They claimed that the object stood about 7 feet tall and was around 15 feet long. While they were near the craft, a hatch suddenly opened and a ladder extended to the ground. With this, out stepped an odd-looking being that would be the stuff of nightmares. The being stood 4 feet tall, was wearing a reflective suit that they claimed almost glowed. It had 2 toes on its feet, it had long arms, and its fingers had long claws. The skin was brown colored, it had long pointy ears, its face was so wrinkly that no features could be seen, but it did have 3 long, silvery pointed teeth coming from where the mouth should be. It also is worth noting that it appeared to be carrying a strange object that looked like a rifle slung over its shoulder. With the door open, the boys managed to glimpse another being inside the craft, and it was sitting in a chair, working many switches and buttons. The original creature seemed unaware of the boys, and took to surveying the landscape. That is, until he quickly turned and patted Katsuhiro twice on the shoulder, all the while speaking in a language that was described as listening to a tape recorder backwards. The boy suddenly dropped to the ground, and it is unknown if this was out of fear or from something that the being had done to him. Masato quickly lifted his friend's body to his shoulders and ran away to find help at home. When they arrived, they told their mothers about what had happened, and in order to appease the boys' wild imagination, they all went out to investigate the area. Before reaching the vineyard, the women saw an orange light pulsing in the same area. Suddenly the light burst skyward and produced such a brilliance that the women had to cover their eyes. It is mentioned that an 8-year-old boy named Ichiro Minageshi also claimed to have seen the UFOs while they were still in the sky. Others, both young and old, all claimed that they saw lights prior to the boys' encounter. After hearing about the stories, the boys' schoolmaster named Nobuoshi Kaneko gathered up equipment and other co-workers and decided to check out the landing site themselves. It was then that they discovered 2 of the cement poles to support the vines had been pushed over, and it was deemed impossible for the boys to have been able to do that. They also found ring-shaped impressions in the dirt, and there were claims that their soil showed signs of radiation. The The boys were questioned many times by various people, including UFO investigator and author Masaru Mori, but their stories never wavered. When authorities were questioned about the event, they claimed that it was probably lights from the YS-11 planes that normally flew low. With you seeing the image of one of these craft, it seems hard to believe that people would mistake this for a saucer or ball of orange light. We are now venturing to Puerto Rico for our next encounter that is a bit questionable as to what exactly it is. You know I am fairly strict on classifying beings, but this one could either be a cryptid, alien, or even a different type of spirit. Since aspects of this story fit the alien version, and for the fact that I want to talk about it and have no other avenue to do so, I'll include it here. This being is known as the Alberto Entity or the Alberto Creature. In July of 1973, a boy named Jose Alamor Jr. entered the El Yunque National Forest and was never seen again. While sadly this isn't an uncommon occurrence, this story certainly takes a rather odd turn. On October of that same year, Jose Alamar Sr. and his girlfriend Ana Dominguez, along with their daughter and some friends, traveled to Alberta to resume searching for their lost child. For unknown reasons, Jose Sr. drove their car to an abandoned ranch and instructed Ana and her daughter to stay in the car while they searched the property. After a period of time, Ana became weary and rested her head on the window of the car's door. It was at this moment that she distinctly heard Jose Jr.'s voice calling to her from the right side of the vehicle. In a state of shock, she stared out into the darkness, but couldn't see anyone there. However, it was obvious that her daughter had heard the voice as well. Suddenly she heard the voice again, but this time it was from the left side of the vehicle, and it said, "Open the car door, I'm back." Without thinking, Ana reached for the door handle, but stopped when she noticed the terrified look her daughter had on her face as she was staring at something. Standing outside the car in front of the windshield was a 7-foot-tall, completely black creature that had small pointy ears, an egg-shaped head, it was very thin, and its eyes were giant, shiny, black ovals. As she watched, the creature placed one of its hands on the glass, and it had 3 long, skinny fingers that were said to resemble that of a chicken's claw. Out of fear, Ana started to hit the horn of the car and screamed for help. At this moment, Jose Jr. and the rest of the search party came running from around the house, but the entity had already vanished into the darkness. Later, both Ana and her daughter claimed that they felt the voice they heard wasn't said audibly, but that it had been done telepathically. Some feel that maybe this being was trying to help her find her child, while others say it was wanting to abduct them as well. There are those that think that somehow the boy actually transformed into that creature. All I know is that regardless if this being was trying to be helpful, if I was in that situation, I certainly wouldn't be opening that door. I must note that as you can see, this does fit with possible other classifications of beings outside of alien. I feel the eye shape and the fact that it is using possible telepathy makes it fit more in line with the extraterrestrial beings. My only caveat to this is the fact that aliens tend not to be stumped by using a door handle, and this story does play into the ideas of evil entities needing someone to invite them in. I am on the fence on this one, and I would love to hear your interpretations of it. As I end this video, I wanted to mention that there are plenty of other stories similar to this out there, and I could make a part 4. However, as a heads up, there are a few that I will be making a separate video for, since they are quite in depth. The being known as Also One is highly requested by viewers named German Shepherd and Rough Collies, as well as others, and I think it may deserve its own case study. The Katami Abductors is a really fascinating story that has so much information that I feel it deserves its own video as well. Yet there are others that are a bit far-fetched for my taste, such as the Long Prairie Can story. I also wanted to include the Mars rover curiosity cleaning event that was suggested by user Papa Filth, but that story seems to be thoroughly debunked. Although I was curious, who was taking these photos of the rover if it was on Mars? If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you share my videos with someone you know who may be interested in this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.